So we're joined now by Margrethe Vestager, the Commissioner for Competition for Europe, Executive Vice President, and also for a Europe Fit for the Digital Age. Three major developments really coming from your desk this week. You know, it's only Tuesday. On Monday, we had this massive fine out of Apple. Today, we have a defense strategy update, which you presented a little bit earlier. And on Thursday, we have the DMA coming into effect. So all of these things, you know, have your fingerprints all over it. I'd like to start with the sort of the Apple fine. It seems like we got a little bit of a taste this week from what's to come with the DMA. What is the message that you wanted to send and you want Apple and the other gatekeepers to hear from that fine this week?
Well, first and foremost, thank you very much for having me. It is indeed a very interesting and important week for us. And the messaging from the Apple case, of course, is don't do this. Stop what you're doing. Don't put anything in place that would have the same effect. We see an illegal abuse that has been ongoing for a number of years, which has made it, you know, virtually impossible for customers to choose if they want the payment service in-app by Apple, paying the fee, or they would want to go, for instance, to a website and have a cheaper subscription price. And that consumer choice, well, that has not been enabled.
And do you think that 1.8 billion is actually enough? It's a huge number, but we had the Spotify CEO come out who obviously precipitated this sort of whole investigation, saying that, you know, really lauding the efforts, but saying that it won't be enough to really amend Apple's behavior.
Well, the fine is there to punish past behavior and, of course, to be deterrent for it not to be repeated. We have the DMA coming into to compliance, or the demand of compliance is this Thursday, saying, listen, you need to be able to carry another app store, for instance, and you cannot put in place a fee structure that sort of disables the benefits of the DMAs for all the market participants, because the entire point of the DMA is for the market to be open for innovation, for competition, for consumer choice.
And talking about past behavior, let's talk about future behavior. One of the things that you asked was that Apple drop all of its anti-steering behavior immediately. Has it done so? And what is the consequence if it were not to?
Well, it wasn't in my feed this morning. So actually, I don't know as we speak if the anti-steering has disappeared. It should have disappeared as from yesterday, actually, on music streaming apps and for rest of apps by Thursday when we have compliance day of the DMA.
And I want to ask also, what has your contact been with Apple? When was the last time you spoke to Tim Cook?
Well, I was in San Francisco quite recently for a speech, a conference thing. And then I took a small tour in order to see the CEOs in their sort of native environment. And we had a conversation, I think, actually quite, you know, committing on the Apple side on compliance with the DMA.
And so day one of the DMA, because this is really going to be the focus now coming into effect on Thursday, what is your priority? What are the actions do you think that need to be immediately addressed that this covers now?
Well, Thursday, compliance day, reports will have to be filed. What have we done as a gatekeeper to comply? Then we have a number of workshops, one on each gatekeeper for third parties to say, does it work? Do we see the efforts in order to live up to the DMA? And then, of course, if we have a suspicion that there is non-compliance, we will open cases. And we will open cases based on where can we have effect? Where do we have the most blatant non-compliance, if we find that? So that we can throw our resources in there where we have the most obvious benefits.
But you've come up with this architecture, presumably with something in mind of the things that you see that concerns you. And I really would like to get a steer of kind of what are the things that concern you the most that the DMA will be targeting and capturing?
Well, I think it's important, for instance, that you can have more than one app store on your phone. Because in other circumstances, if you don't like one shop, you go into another one. If you don't like a generalized shop, you'll go into one that is more specific. You know, I see that there are multiple app stores that could be interesting for parents towards their children, for gamers, you know, numbers of things. That is really important. And that the environment is not sort of disabled to make that really unattractive. Because the DMA is quite specific on a number of things. These things also when it comes to having a fee structure that actually enables people to use these new benefits.
It is also quite specific on potential consequences, which include fines potentially quite a bit larger than what we've seen already this week, but also as a sort of ultimate nuclear option, we're talking about the breakup potentially of some of these companies and some of these businesses. You've already asked for that with the Google ad tech business. Do you think that Europe and that the consumer would benefit from breakups of some of these companies?
I think consumers will benefit from living up to the DMA. You know, what we want is compliance. Mm-hmm. Our goal is not to break up a company. Our goal is not to impose, really hefty fines. Yeah. Our goal is compliance, so that the market is open. We think that gives choice, that gives innovation. So our sort of the hard end of our toolbox is there to make sure that there is a very strong incentive actually to comply. And we have softer tools at opening cases. We can have a regulatory dialogue for those who have an incentive to say, okay, we didn't get it quite right, but instead of throwing everything at a gatekeeper, then we say, well, you're definitely on the right track, and maybe with a few nimble adjustments you can get there. And then, of course, we may have real issues where we think there's no way around, where we need a non-compliance case here.
Right. You probably don't take this job if you're not, if you're afraid of making a couple of enemies, and particularly with these hefty fines and some of the harder tools that you're describing. Some people are not obviously thrilled about that, even outside of the tech world, potentially U.S. politicians. Obviously, we're dealing with an election year in the United States. Do you think that a second Trump administration would make your job more difficult? There was obviously some dialogue between the two of you the last time.
Well, I of course will not prejudge the U.S. election. It has been really important for me to address concerns that this is directed against U.S. companies. Mm-hmm. This is to enable businesses to get to their customers. This is to enable the market actually to absorb innovation, because you can only absorb innovation if you can get to your customers. Investment in a business is much more interesting if that business can actually do its business. Mm. And that goes for EU-based companies, that goes for US-based companies. You remember the first Google case we have, the most prominent complainants, they were US-based companies. So I think it's really important to maintain that this is about a market that is open, dynamic, is there for you to do business, no matter where you're headquartered.
Yeah, an executive vice president. It's also obviously an election year in the U.S., but here in Europe, and a kind of your digital hat for this. There's a question. So Facebook, for example, has openly said that they're stepping away. They're de-emphasizing news to a certain degree because they got burnt from bias and sort of fake news and this sort of thing, which obviously comes with its own risks and creates a sort of void. Is that something that concerns you? Is that something that the Commission would sort of take a look at?
Well, it's for any business to decide what would be their terms and that you need to sign up for, what they want to carry for their own platform. I think it's important that no matter who you are, that you take it really seriously, that you have, obligations under the Digital Services Act. Yeah. Can my services be misused to undermine the elections or the integrity of an election? How do I set up a system for illegal content to be taken down? How do I comply with a code of conduct in order to be able to deal with harmful content? I don't think that it's possible for a very large online platform to sort of to get away from those obligations, because the thing is that they have systemic effects in our societies.
Completely, and they're the highways of information increasingly. Exactly. So, but it's also the first sort of election year where AI is a big part of the conversation. And I really would like to know what your kind of unique concerns are around AI in the kind of context of elections. And does the AI Act give you kind of the tools to manage some of those?
Well, the AI Act is not in effect yet. It will only be fully applicable in a year and a half or something like that. A number of the big players here, they signed up in Munich for a pledge that is not the AI Act, not the presidential order, not the G7 Code of Conduct, but is focused on the use of artificial intelligence in pictures, in videos. And, the risk, of course, is that you cannot keep up with the speed of how things are spread. And this is, of course, why it is important that they make an effort for people to know this is actually fake the minute they see it, and not afterwards when it's taken down and people start talking about it. Because in the running up of an election, in the last days before the election actually take place, of course, it's really important that what you see is genuine information, that what you see is real debates between real politicians that are not disabled or enabled by artificial intelligence.
Yeah, and taking on sort of AI, Musk has brought this suit against OpenAI, actually bringing many of the same questions I think that you had about, and last time you spoke to Bloomberg, you wanted to get a better idea of what the relationship between Microsoft and OpenAI is. Do you have a better idea of what that relationship is, and what is it?
Well, we're getting closer. We don't have final conclusions yet, but of course it's important for us to see, is there a change of control? Mm-hmm. Is OpenAI still an independent company, or are they de facto acquired by Microsoft? So we will finalize that, and then we'll, of course, take it from there.
Do you have an idea of when you might get an idea of kind of more concretely?
No.
Okay. And more broadly speaking, sort of the political shift that we've seen kind of in Europe. I sit in Berlin, where we've seen really a move to the right and a bit more sort of Euroscepticism. We've seen kind of some dissatisfaction with, say, the farmers, with some of the control in Brussels. Do you think that that is going to make things a little bit harder for the EU to be effective, particularly since you've announced this defense plan today, which is really talking for a more centralized role in Europe? Why is Brussels the right place to do that?
Well, every member state will have their own defense.
Yeah.
What we can enable is sort of the framework for the defense industry to be more effective, to have better economies of scale, by member states procuring more together, having more sort of strategic projects together, because we're not in the business of buying or selling weapons. We're not in the business of a European defense. That is for member states. Mm-hmm. But there is a very important potential in the European defense industry, producing more, having more long-term vision in what is being produced, because defense budgets will increase in the coming years. And with the needs of Ukraine, we have been, really faced with the fragmented nature of the European defense industry, very much along national borders, making things very inefficient. We have so many different versions of what ought to be similar weapon systems. And now must be the time to correct that, for member states to come together. And what we have provided today is a framework for a much more focused and stronger European defense industry.
And I want to talk a little bit more also about industry, because obviously your focus has been a lot on the digital world, but the industrial world is still here. Yes. And this is sort of in an age where there's much more subsidy, much more state aid being talked about globally speaking here. Is this a concern for you in terms of looking at the different industries and how everyone is scrambling to try to support some of their industries? Are there particular industries that concern you? I mean, I'll think specifically of, say, the chip industry, where in Germany you've had a huge amount of state aid going to Intel. Do you think that will make an uncompetitive market?
Well, first and foremost, the need for semiconductors shows that traditional industries and digital sector is merging more and more. Yes. Because you have more technology immersed in all the kind of machinery, where Europe has a very, very strong tradition and is fully, an industrial DNA. And we have looked at all these semiconductor investments, and we find that they are a kind of market repair. Because it will give Europe a much more heavy footprint in the global value chain and supply chain of semiconductors. We will not be self-sufficient, but we will be much stronger than we were in producing sort of part of the suite of semiconductors that you actually need to make an autonomous car drive, or an e-vehicle actually making it. So I think that these are necessary support systems, and we have a very good dialogue with the Americans, and also a transparency methods, so that we do not see sort of subsidy shopping, that businesses go from one side to the other of the Atlantic to see where is the subsidy the biggest. And
just finally and quickly, your mandate will end at some point in the next year or so. What's next for Margrethe Vestager?
Well, remains to be seen, but as I usually say, ask that question, you will be the first to know.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much for your time, Executive Vice President.
Thank you very much. Pleasure being here.
Thank you.